I made a push stick, and I paid particular attention to the fit and the ergonomics. In this video, I'm going to show when not to use a pusher, how to use a push block most of the time, but how I made this pusher, and then when a pusher can be very useful. And I'll show a couple of rip cuts and how to do a good rip cut with a pusher. I don't use a push stick except maybe once every 6 months or even less. I rarely ever. I could certainly run my entire shop without a push stick. That's not difficult. I can do everything I want to do without one, but I wanted to make one, and I'll get into that. But your number one tool for staying safe and having control over your cuts is your sled. So the sled is usually the first thing I try to work with if I can, and I've got a video on that. I've made a separate video about sleds. And then, of course, if you're going to use a fence for a rip cut, then the number one tool you want to use is a push block. And the gripper push blocks from Microjig, I think, are by far the best. I recommend getting the full Monty set, and they're very adjustable, so it's easy to set up for a difficult, say a narrow cut like that, just like this. And you can put a tailpiece on the back, and this is really the right tool for the job. You don't want to mess around with push sticks for most difficult cuts. I set this up high because I want to show my favorite most difficult cut, which is splitting a piece of plywood like this, which is always hard. And I've shown it using my sled where I've been able to trap it and it works fine. But in this case, again, we can do it using 2 push blocks. And I just want to show that because you don't want to mess around with a push stick when you can almost always use a push block more safely. And so here's the cut, here's the setup for this. I've got one push block this way, and then the other one has what I call the feather board here underneath. And that pushes in, but it doesn't push in too much. And in fact, you can see here we have a little tailpiece that grips. So this will be my second one in line for this cut, and that fits perfectly like that. You can see I have a tunnel here for the blade to come through, and the blade is set up just at the right height. And then I have a front one, so I can push them like this. I can't really stand up because I'll be out of the frame, but this little train here works really well, and the tailpiece here lets me pull it all the way through, and it won't even get cut off. It's just the right size for this. And this cut works. I've done it, a little dangerous. I prefer to use a sled to make this cut. But if you had to make a long one for some reason, that's how I would do it. My goal in this video is to show you how I made a comfortable, good fitting push stick that has good ergonomics for my hand. I've made a couple different push sticks over the years. This was just a piece of scrap I had left over that I fashioned into a push stick. Never really used it. I was gonna make a new one, and I just sort of got out my stuff and I was starting in, and I realized that if you have it thin, I want to work on ergonomics here. I want to make a tool that I enjoy. Even if I don't use it, I think the exercise is fun. And so I thought, you know, if you have this, it can wobble if you don't have much in the hand. So then I started over, and I thought what you want to do is you want to place the tool in the hand, in here, in this gripping area here. So I got out a saw, and you know, it's not the world's best saw, but I just wanted to understand the ergonomics here, what's going on, right? And whether that makes sense for me. And what's the principle here is that the tool fits into this space here, and then this space here. So you could paint it onto your hand, or just visualize it that this is the space you want to fill up. So I don't have a template for this. I don't want you to do what I've done. I want you to think about your hand. And I don't do a lot of drawings anyway. I just build stuff and try it. but I wanted to fit the hand here so that this is full of wood. So this is nice and firm, right? And then I wanted to give a little extra room on the knuckles, just in case you've got a piece of material that knocks back a bit and you don't get too much impact here. So just to try to freehand a little bit, and I'll just walk you through it instead of show you because it's faster. So I took my piece of plywood and I cut out the basic shape. First I used a hole saw here, then I used a Forstner bit, and then I ran my, just drew a line. I just freehanded a line and then used my jigsaw to cut out this void. And then I used the round bit here, I used the 1/2 inch round bit here on the router to get a nice round profile. So this is really curved all the way around. It doesn't have a flat spot in the middle. So where does that fit? That fits right here, right? That's what you want. So that's what I've got here. And then on all the rest of these corners, I used the 1/8, or maybe a little bit bigger. I used a smaller rounding bit because if you look at your hand, your hand kind of can make a triangle here. You've got a kind of a natural space here, whereas when you curl your fingers around, it's different. This is more square and this is more round, see? So here I'm using less of a radius here, and that gives me the fit that really fills up this void in my hand and gives me so much more control. And then I just came in here and I used these sanding bits to try to just keep my hand here and find out where the web of my forefinger and thumb is going to go. And I made it asymmetrical. You see I've got more here because that's where I need a little more relief. But I've really tried hard to fill up this void so that I've got all the power in this is running right along my wrist, right? And it feels good. It feels good for me. And so I want you to think about how you can make ergonomic tools. Doesn't even have to be a push stick. Could be anything. Whatever you're making, think it through and try to design something that gives you that fit for purpose, that where you've thought through all the angles and the details so that you just have a rock solid grip. Now down here it was pretty simple. I wanted a 1/2 inch, not a 1/4 inch, because I just want to have this, the ability to push like that when I want, and another one here. And interestingly, and I got this from another guy on YouTube, is that you want this to be forward more than a lot of them. You don't want it to be too far back on the hand, so that when you're done, when your piece is passed through, your hand isn't too close to the blade. So if you look at it from on top, I'm done here and my hand is far away from the blade. And that's a feature, that's a design feature. I'm not setting it back under my hand. It's also harder to see there because my hand will cover it up. So here I can get a line of sight and just push like this, and then I'm done right here. So, as long as I can continue like this, that's fine, and just push it out. But the cutting is done by the time before my hand gets anywhere near the blade. So this is a design feature, and these are just glued in, and then I put a layer of glue and then screwed them in, glue and screw, and the screws serve as the clamp, right? Because it's awkward to clamp on an angled surface. So I screwed it in, and 4 hours later I unscrewed it, and now I've got a pushing surface here that will work really well. I just used the sled to just nail the angles here. And then anytime this gets chewed up or I want anything different, I can just chisel this off. And then after I made this, I just did a bit of rough sanding all around, and nothing too fancy, don't have to finish it. Actually, here's a little, and just kind of make a few nice little shapes. And it's really ready for years of sitting on the shelf and not being used. I see a lot of videos on YouTube where people are not pushing very well. So the basics of pushing is that there is a line that I call the push line where you want to push. You actually can see people pushing on this corner where they're sort of pushing in, and that's a bad idea. That's a bad place to push from, because then when you get closer to the blade, you're doing the wrong thing. I also see way too many people pushing inside to get their hand away from the blade, and this is the wrong place to push from. So if you think of an imaginary line that splits this distance between the blade and the fence, you want to push on this side of that line. So your push line will be about here. And this is where you want to do all the pushing, straight along this line. And this is for any rip cut, you want to push, about 40% toward the blade and 60% away from the fence. And even if you're going to use your fingers, this is where you want to have your fingers. Now, if you're not comfortable with that, and a lot of people aren't, that is the time you get a pusher or the block. Now, the block is pretty easy to set up for this. Here I have set up my block so that I have a tunnel here, and that's fine. And then I have my tailpiece right on the push line. See? So this is a very safe, smart way to make this cut. You can also use a pusher. You can just use it right on this line. Do it this way, or you can do it this way. Now remember, when you use your table saw, you do so at your own risk. I'm just showing you some 3 different ways to push this through. I've got a longer piece that I will do it with, but just to show the setup here, the center line here between the blade and the fence is about right here, right? And so the push line is going to be here, okay? And many people will use their thumbs on this cut. It is up to you. You have to decide if you are willing to take that risk. Most people are, because it's a very controlled environment, and you just, kind of keep your hand next to the fence, but push the thumb along the push line. And that's a fine way to get through this cut. A much smaller cut would be way too dangerous, and you don't want to risk putting your thumb in there. That would be here, and your thumb will be way too close to the blade. That would be bad, and that's when you want to use a push stick. Now the other way to come through is just set up your push block so that your push block is against the fence and your tailpiece is on the push line. You don't want your tailpiece on the center here. You want your tailpiece to the left of the center. So you want to be against the fence, and right here you're going to be on the right line. And this is the safest way to make this cut. On the other hand, lots of people, don't want to mess around with that. They don't want to set up for it. You just grab your pusher and push on the push line right here. And this is probably the #1 use of a pusher, is when you've got a bunch of long rips to make, especially when your piece is out here and it's going to fall off if you don't keep control of it, and you're going to use your hand. Notice I'm using a splitter for this. I can't believe the number of people I see on YouTube who don't have a splitter. Can't imagine why you would not have a splitter on a rip cut. Now I'll do the same thing, and I'll just use the push stick. Same basic cut with the push stick on the push line. Proper use of a push stick, and when it gets closer, here you're either going to use a push stick, but you can also use the block. The block is great for this cut. You have to move the tailpiece so you're pushing along the push line, right here, so set that up properly and you'll have a fine tool for making a cut. This is the safest way to do it, setting up, but since many people don't want to set up, they'll just grab the pusher, and that's a fine way to make a cut. One final note about this, if I were using this all the time, and I know a lot of people do, then I would set up, I would make a little insert here for my fence that fit really perfectly in, and then I'd use my undersized bit to get a perfect fit dado groove down the middle so that I could, and then I would screw it in. I'd drill and tap small holes into my fence actually, and then I'd be able to, imagine it's here, we can just use it as the example, and then I'd just be able to have a perch for it where it just fit in perfectly and just leave it there, right? Or if I were doing a bunch of cutting, I could just always stick it back right on there. And that I think would be handy and interesting to do as an addition. But I plan to maybe never use this, but I had fun making it, and I hope you've learned something about ergonomics on your projects as well. This is David Siegel for Cutting Through the Noise.